Just want to welcome you and thank you for being here with us tonight. Tonight, I actually get to teach one of my more favorite lessons to teach because this lesson, the victory lesson, is what the lesson is, but it's one of the easier tools we have here in the program. It's easy to implement and it put into practice in a recovery. And when we do it, it typically puts a smile on our face and a little bit of joy and happiness into our hearts. And so it helps us feel good and positive about what we're doing when we're working a program in here. But at the same time, it can also be challenging to work this step because if we don't understand the value that it brings to our recovery process, we may skip doing it. So I hope after tonight that as we get through this lesson, you will be convinced of how powerful and important applying this simple tool is and begin doing it in your recoveries in a way that helps you keep your progress and your recovery going. You know, one of the things that happens when we celebrate our recoveries and celebrate our victories is it helps to grow our self-esteem because as we're seeing positive changes happen in us and in our life, we grow our esteem, we grow our confidence, right? And that grows our hope and inspiration, which can fuel our motivation to keep working our recoveries. Because if we discount our progress or forget to acknowledge the changes that God is doing, we can lose sight of the progress we're making. We may digress by telling ourselves nothing is happening or get stuck. So I want to make this real right now. Did you guys all know? You all had a victory tonight. Did you all know that? Yep. You guys had a victory. And the victory you all had tonight is you showed up here. Amen. That is a victory. I want you to give yourselves a hand for showing up tonight for yourself. But I also want you to look to somebody to your right or your left. You're going to have to go like chase people. Go give a fist bump. Go give a fist bump and tell somebody else, good job for being here tonight. Good job. Make sure everybody gets hit. Everybody needs to go give a fist bump, fist bump, fist bump. Thank you. We all came tonight. We're keeping it real, people. We're keeping it real. And, you know, so I just want to say, how good did that feel? To just acknowledge, hey, I did show up for myself here tonight. I could have stayed home and sat on the couch and couch surfed and watched television. But I came here for myself and to work on myself and to see what God has to say to me. And that's very important. And we got to notice those small things that we're doing, those small changes we're incorporating into our life to have positive outcomes and a positive life and to deal with experiences in our life that we're going through and being in community, because this is where we grow in community together is here. And this may not feel like one of your bigger victories, but every small decision we make builds upon the other. And then that greatly impacts our recoveries here and our growth and our change and our progress. So it's super important that we acknowledge all victories and celebrate them. Now, I do, and I will, like we just talked about the good side of victories, right? It kind of felt good. It kind of felt positive to acknowledge what we did for ourselves tonight. But there's also a downside to victories. And the downside is our life's got to get a little messy, right? Life's got to be a little messy because victories are not gained in the absence of challenges. I just want to make sure that's soaked in. Victories do not come in the absence of challenges, but by how we face walking through them with God's help. And then guess what? Over time, we notice we're thinking and responding differently to our problems, our relationships, or our addictions. And all those small changes we've implemented along the way help us to navigate how we're going to live today. And God wants us to have these victories. He is ready to help us have these victories. In 1 Corinthians 15:57, it says, "Thanks be to God. He gives us the victory through our Lord Jesus Christ." So therefore, I just want to encourage you, do not grow weary in your quest to celebrate and notice all the progress you're making in your lives because this simple step can fuel that motivation you need. So that's my intro. Hopefully you're kind of convinced right now victories are important. We need to celebrate them. So let's jump in and read our principle and step for tonight so we can get into our acronym. Did everybody get a handout? Does anybody not get a handout or need one? Because we have handouts for tonight. Okay, if you didn't get one, they're on the back table back there. But Principle 5 says, voluntarily submit to every change God wants to make in my life and humbly ask Him to remove my character defects. Happy are those whose greatest desire is to do what God requires, Matthew 5:6. Then there's step 6. We were entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. And it goes along with the corresponding scripture of James 4:10, humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will lift you up. And this particular lesson has 2 steps that go with it, and step 7. We humbly ask him to remove all our shortcomings. And this corresponding scriptures, we confess our sins, he is faithful and just and will forgive us our sins and purify us from all unrighteousness. 1 John 1:9. You know, when we work steps 6 and 7, we're at a place where we're going from being ready for God to help us change to step 7, which is being willing to have God remove our character defects. And this is a process, and we could get stuck here for a little while. We can get stuck at this part of our journeys because to go from being ready to being willing, we could be stuck because guess what? Sometimes we like our character defects. We've grown fond of them. We're comfortable with them. We like how they make us feel, even if it's short term. And when we go to replace them with new choices, it means walking into the unknown. And what will happen when we take a different path? And there's an unknown to that. And that's why we need Jesus to help us on our journey in here. We're going to need his power to trust his plan for our lives so we can gain the strength, wisdom, and understanding we will need to give them up. And by the way, I just want to mention, when you celebrate, you don't have to throw a big party. And as a matter of fact, I think it's a deterrent sometimes for us to celebrate our victories because we think we got to do something really big or expensive. We think we got to go hire a band or go out to a pricey dinner each time you have a victory. And if you can afford it, that's great. Do it. Make sure to invite me. I want to come and celebrate with you. But there's other ways we can celebrate and acknowledge our victories, and it doesn't cost you a cent, and you can do it right here in CR, in our program, in community together with everybody else. You can pick up a chip is one way. So if it's time for one of your monthly chips or one of your yearly chips, come up here. And I don't care if it's your 30-day chip and I'm still struggling, but I'm still coming. I don't know how long it's going to take, but I'm still asking God to help me get through this or overcome this. And if it's your yearly chip, you come up and talk about the progress you made or the victories you're having and tell about how God's helping you. But if it's not time for one of your chips, you can also share about your victories in the share groups and tell everybody in there about the victories you had that time or that week. You can call your sponsors and let them know. And be sure to tell us about them. This is probably the most important, vital place to tell us about them is in your testimonies. Everybody, after they do a 12-step, writes a full testimony, and those should be filled with all the victories you have been having since you've been working the program and have done a 12-step. And they're all powerful ways that we can not only remind ourselves of our victories, but we can also encourage others that if God helped someone like me, he's willing and able to help everyone else that's here in this room. So enough about why it's important to celebrate our victories. Let's go ahead and jump into our acronym, and this is when you'll pull out your handout. But one way to have a victory is to value small changes. Big change, small change, we got to value both. Don't minimize your progress by only noticing your big changes. I was reminded of how easily this can happen last year when I was having a conversation with a gal from the program in here, and she was telling me how after she completed her 12 steps, she felt like she made no progress or change. So I just let her keep talking and tell me about everything that was going on with her life, and she went on to tell me a story about how she made amends with a family member and how much it improved her connection with this person and changed her relationship for the better with this person. And then she proceeded to go from that story to another story about how at work, something happened that was out of her control, and she decided to stop and pray about what to do next instead of her old reactions of having a meltdown and losing control. And I paused her there, and I stopped her, and I said, you just told me about 2 changes that you did that you learned here in the program. I go, I don't understand. How is that not progress? I'm like, help me understand. Why don't you see that? And it was like a light bulb went off in her head. And she realized at that moment she did have progress, but she didn't value it because to her it was small and not the changes she was wanting God to do. And sometimes, the thing I took away from this I thought was very powerful is sometimes we can get so focused on what we want to see God do, we are missing out on seeing everything he's already accomplished in us. So we need to watch out for that. Again, sometimes don't get focused on all the things you want to see God do and change in your life. Because you will miss out on seeing what he's already accomplished and doing in your life if you do that. we have to remember also that sometimes God's answer is no, or a total redirection, and sometimes his answer comes in his timing and not ours. So part of our journey in here together is we're learning how to surrender and accept these answers as we trust God to lead us to the best possible outcome. Now, I know you're probably wondering why Dave's senior high school picture is up on the screen behind me. You may be thinking he looks like a ladies' man with that gelled out hair and that little sweet bow tie he's wearing, and he is pretty adorable. But now look at him a year later. Just a few small changes later, he dumped the hair gel and the bow tie, went to the gym, and voila, look what we got. Got a miracle before our eyes here tonight. He went from small and nerdy cutie pie to a stud muffin with puffy hair and cool shades. So let me ask you, after a few of these changes, a few of these changes where he finally grew into his man body, so I get that some of it is, that transformation, the difference of his age, but he still had to do something to maintain it. It wasn't going to stay that way if he didn't work on it. He had to go to the gym. He had to watch what he ate. He had to go buy some new shades. He had to get rid of his shirts and his hair products. And let me ask you, do you think he wanted to keep up this new habit after he saw the changes and all the girl traction, attention stuff he's probably getting? You betcha. And even though he is back to wearing hair gel and T-shirts again, good changes, honey. It's all right. You're doing much better with the hair gel thing, I just want to say. But sometimes we have to go back to some of our old ways, but you get the point. You get the point. And you know what else we learn when we celebrate our changes? We're reminded with God, we can survive anything we go through. And not only survive it, but grow through it. 2 Peter 1:5-7 says this, "For this very reason, make every effort to add to your faith goodness, and to goodness knowledge, and to knowledge self-control, and to self-control perseverance, and to perseverance godliness, and to godliness mutual affection, and to mutual affection love." And we can't have any of those things or experience any of those things without walking through the valleys with God, because that's what gives us the opportunities to grow in our knowledge, self-control, perseverance, godliness, and love. So we need to value the big and the small changes, because these are the changes that are growing us into Christ's image. Don't get caught up into if you got what you wanted or not from God. Focus on any changes you have made, any new things like we just did tonight, acknowledging ourselves. We showed up. We showed up and came tonight. That's worth having a victory and celebrating. Another way we can have more victories is by identifying what needs attention next. Sometimes what we need to work on is obvious to us, and sometimes we may need to slow down and evaluate our daily lives to determine what needs attention next. If you're stuck or struggling to identify what you may need to work on next, I just want to remind you to check out the daily inventory tool. Because when we do a quick assessment each night, we can ask ourselves, I only have 3 questions for my daily inventory tool that I ask myself. That keeps it simple for me. And I ask myself things like, what did I do right today? Where did I mess up today? Do I owe anyone amends? And that kind of helps me keep it simple, to the point, and I can figure out pretty darn quickly if there's something I missed or need to go clean up. And it helps me take care of it. And then over time, if you're one of those people that keeps a regular daily inventory, eventually if there's a bigger pattern emerging, you're going to start noticing it. You'll see it written in your daily inventory when you're asking yourself those questions. And so it's a great tool to help us evaluate and understand what might need attention next. Another area we can evaluate is our addictions. If you struggled with addictions, my question to you would be, did you trade in your one addiction for another? You might not have drank or had drugs in months or years, but what did you replace that habit with? What healthy new alternative are we practicing? Or did we add smoking, food, gambling, shopping, porn, or some other new addiction to its place? We need to watch out that we don't fall into the trap of rationalizing that our new addiction isn't as bad as the old addiction, so it's okay. Because the truth is, if we're caught up in another addiction, that means we never rooted out the source or the cause of the previous one. And I get it. It's easier. It's easier just to go pick up another addiction. it's easier to go do another habit because it can be painful to face the past experiences that might have drove you to grab and use an addiction to cope with your life. But I want you to know God is ready to help us see our pain and walk through it if we will ask him. Psalm 139, 23 and 24 says, "Search me, God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there's any offensive way in me, and lead me in the way of everlasting." And God is willing to help us discover the root causes of our addictions and our compulsive behaviors if we ask him. And I just want to remind you, this self-evaluation I'm talking about, the daily inventory, if you decide to use that, isn't to beat ourselves up. It's to raise our awareness that we have more we could work on. And, many of you know that for the past 2 years, I have been asking God to help me walk through my grieving process of losing a child. Now, looking back, I began to notice I've added a lot of new changes to my life. I've read through 6 grief books with my husband. I've been to multiple grief counselors on different topics that have helped me through the grieving process. At one point, we even joined it's a 12-week program. It's called Grief Share program. And another thing I ended up starting was an identity journal where I'm staying focused on my identity of who I am in Christ. And I'm also writing out in it who God is. And so I've got this identity journal going on, helping me also through my grieving process. And of course, I'm still coming to CR. I'm still working on walking through my grieving here and working through that journey as I walk through it, through the program here. And I didn't do all these things at once. These are things I rolled out over almost a 2.5-year process now. They took time. I could only do it as I could do it. I had to do a little at a time and just bite off small pieces and get the right help and support around me as I was walking through this journey. And I am. And these were good and new habits for me to add to my grieving process. And they all helped me in some way. But I do admit, I learned the most about the grieving process through the Grief Share program. They also learned that there were some things I learned in that program I didn't want to hear. Things like it can take 2 to 5 years to grieve the loss of a child. In my mind, I know there was a part of me that was hoping deep down that if I kept doing something, if I kept myself moving forward, that somehow my healing would be quicker and I would get this grieving stuff behind me. But what I learned was that grief has its own timeline. And I had better adjust my expectations and slow down, or I would make this journey a lot more stressful and harder on myself than I needed to. I needed to stop pushing, and I needed to stop beating myself up over what I considered slow progress and celebrate the little steps of accomplishments that helped me to keep moving forward in my grieving. And for me, learning to accept that my recovery isn't always going to be about how I want it to go, and I'm going to have to make adjustments accordingly as I'm going through it, that's a victory. When our perspective changes and it's different, that's a victory. When God helps us to see what we're going through differently and to trust him through the process instead of fighting it or trying to make it happen how we want it to happen, when we want it to happen, that's a victory. And so that was a good thing for me to learn, and it really helped me take the pressure off myself to just let God do what he's going to do in me and however long it's going to take. Also, when we have a victory, what should we do? We celebrate what God has done. There's a difference, though, I want to mention here, to celebrating our successes and rewarding ourselves. A reward suggests you've reached the end of the process, you've met your goal and earned your prize. Celebrating our successes is about appreciating the changes even when they come on the heels of a relapse. And I want to share with you a story from God's Word that explains that. It's the prodigal son story from Luke 15, 11 through 24, and parts of it's going to be my condensed version so I can keep my lesson short because we have a long acronym tonight. But Jesus said, there was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, "Father, give me my share of my estate." So he divided the property between them, and not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, and he set off for another country, and there he squandered off his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything, guess what happened next? There was a famine in that country, and he began to be in need. So he got a job there to feed pigs, and he longed to eat the pigs' food, but there wasn't enough, and nobody else would give him any. And then he finally came to his senses and said, "How many of my father's servants have food to spare, and here I am, starving to death. I'm going to go back to my father and say, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants." So he got up and went to his father. But while he was still a long ways off before he even got to his father saw him. He was filled with compassion for him. He ran out to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. The son said to him, "Father, I've sinned against heaven and I've sinned against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son." But the father said to his servants, "Quick, bring the best robe and a ring and some sandals. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." So they began to celebrate. And a story reminded me of how many times have all of us fallen off the beaten path of following Christ to come to our senses, crawl back to God, confess our wrongs, and ask for his forgiveness, to only then tell ourselves we aren't worthy of it. We're not worthy to even be called his son or daughter, that God made a mistake and somehow we aren't deserving of his grace. Does it sound like anybody else's broken record in here besides mine? This is one I've had. I've said that to myself. And I'm thankful to the Lord because he, I believe, treats us like that prodigal father did his son. When the son said, "I've sinned against heaven and you, and I'm no longer worthy to be called your son," what did the father do? He ignored him. He didn't even acknowledge it. He didn't even say anything about it. Instead, he said to his son, "Let's have a feast and celebrate because my son was dead and is now alive again." His son's path was a path of destruction, and he almost died from starvation because of it. But coming back in humility, owning his choices, caused a celebration. And I think there's a lot to learn from that and understand in our recoveries in here. So many times, some of us relapse, and then we think we're not worthy to be here, or not worthy to be in the program, or we're going to be judged, or now we have to start all over again, another blue chip. So what? Come up and get another blue chip and start trying to move forward again. That's part of what our journey is about. None of us are going to achieve perfection ever while we're here on this earth. And so we got to remember that and keep in perspective what God says about our actions, about our past, what we've done, and when we fall down, to get back up. Do what we need to do to keep moving, get moving forward with him again. Because God didn't create us to live in a state of ongoing self-condemnation. When we beat ourselves up and live in that shame-filled thought cycle or refuse to accept God's forgiveness by not celebrating the fact that he's accepted us back with open arms, we then minimize the value and importance of the meaning of Christ's death. He paid for all of our transgressions once and for all. And God is ready and willing and wanting to accept us back into his presence and to celebrate with us that we are no longer lost but found. So celebrate. If that's just coming up and getting a chip, then that's what your celebration is. You relapse, you come up, get a chip, that's your celebration. You came back. You confessed. You acknowledged it. You owned it. And you're getting back up and moving forward again. So what's another way we can remember our victories? We can tell others about them. Telling others about our victories does a couple things. One, it helps us to remember, because I will tell you right now, because I know I've forgotten many of my victories, it's easy to forget them. It's easy to forget about the new things or steps or principles we've implemented and been working because we've made them a part of our life, and we forget that's a change. That's a victory. And also when we tell others about our victories, it encourages them, because God helps us, it encourages others that he can do that for them too. So when you tell others, though, I want to encourage you, also be sure to tell your supporters. Make sure to let them know how much their support helped you. Because when people feel genuinely appreciated, you help to motivate them to keep doing what they're doing. I love hearing all of your testimonies and how God continues to show up in your weaknesses and help you overcome what you're going through. They are very powerful. 1 Corinthians 12:9-10 says, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." God didn't say, "My power is made perfect in your strengths." He said, "My power is made perfect in your weakness, in your struggles, in your pain and your suffering and what you're going through. That's how Christ is seen in us. How do we deal with that? What do we do with it? How are we living through it? Are we facing it? And he says, therefore, I'll boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. Who else do we know that can take our messes and turn them into a message? Or take our tests and turn them into a testimony? Or turn our trials into a triumph? Or change our identities from being a victim into a victor? And that is why we got to list out our victories and make sure we're sharing them and telling them and putting them in our testimonies and getting chips and telling others in our share groups and letting our accountability partner know and our sponsors, because to help make it easier for us to remember them and to share them, encouraging others. Another way we can experience victories is by working our recoveries one day at a time. Hear that a lot. We hear it in our Serenity Prayer. And, you know, it would be nice if we could just ask God to excuse us for the rest of our lives from working on ourselves. I mean, it's so much easier just to be a mess, living in misery, thinking about and focusing on all the wrong things. And when obsessing, we can get stuck in focusing on the past or fearing the future. The only thing we can expect to receive if we do that is anxiety, depression, or maybe even lots of negative thoughts. It's not going to fuel anything positive for us. And Matthew 6:34 says, do not be anxious about tomorrow. God will take care of you tomorrow too. This is the important part to me. Live one day at a time. We're even instructed by the Lord to live in the moment. God made it clear for us to focus living one day at a time, and I discovered when we do that, we actually have many benefits. I'm not going to go over all of them. I'm going to give you a few of them. But one of the benefits of living one day at a time is it can help reduce our anxiety, because we stop focusing on all the stuff we can't control in the past or in the future. And instead, we ask God to help us focus on what can I do today to foster peace into my mind and into my heart. It can also, another benefit is it can also help us improve our focus, because when we concentrate on the task at hand that we want to accomplish today, we learn how to focus on living in the moment. Get out of our head and we think about, what do I got to do? What do I got to change? What do I got to take care of? It can also help to, I actually did the improve. I just did improve your focus, right? I need to work on that, right? Improve my focus. All right, it also helps to increase our gratitude. When we notice and appreciate the big and the small things we are having victory over, we foster a greater contentment and happiness within us. And the last benefit I want to mention when we live it one day at a time is we learn how to be more flexible. Because some of us, okay, let's just say, I'm not going to point out anybody here, but some of us can get stuck in our ways and be a little rigid, and we just like to do things the same old way, it's comfortable. But when we do that, we may miss out on an opportunity where God wants to lead us to something new or different. But if we're inflexible, we can miss out on that blessing. We got to remember, life is unpredictable and things usually never go as planned. And let us all agree to work on living in the moment and allow God to worry about our tomorrow and to take care of our tomorrows. I think it's cool to know that life is full of endless opportunities to celebrate. And you know how I know that? Because I realize there are more battles to come. There are more battles to come. Isn't that good news? Aren't you glad you came tonight? Bet you're glad to hear that. Woohoo! Can't wait. When's the next battle, God? You know, and honestly, there are days I would be like Kermit up there. I just want to be oblivious, just let life take me wherever it wants, remaining disconnected from my pain and problems, and not take responsibility for my part or outcome, isolating and never speaking up about my wants or needs. I think you get the picture. And I was quite miserable when I was living like that. And I was pretty good at living disconnected from my actions prior to attending CR. But over the past 14 years of being in the program that I've been in here, I've learned that life does keep on showing up. I have faced and have worked on so many different things since I've been in the program. And I'm not going to tell you everything, but just to give you an idea, how to forgive my abusers and identify the damage they left behind in me that I was acting out of. A lot of fears and false beliefs. I worked through my controlling ways and meltdowns when my husband was going through cancer. I've attempted to fix, rescue, and control my daughter's mental illness to no avail, but that got me into the program, got me into CR. And of course, I've been working through the grieving process and all the wounds and issues my grief has brought up to the surface. So I think you get the picture, and I'm not going to go on naming more of my battles and unexpected problems that I face. But what I learned was I needed to change how I viewed the unexpected events that kept continuing to show up in my life. I was really good at falling into the why trap. Why me? Why now? Why this? Why does it keep happening? And I had to shift my perspective to stop asking God why and instead ask God, what can I learn from this? What do you have to teach me? What do you want to show me? And the truth is, if we get stuck in the whys, we're never going to get an answer. You can live there in your head forever, obsessing, catastrophizing, ruminating. You're never going to get an answer to why. But what gets us in the moment? What gets us living today? What gets us thinking about, what does God want me to do right now to work on this, or to face this, or to deal with this, or to handle this, or to ignore it and let it go and get it out of my head and focus on His word, whatever it is we need to do. This helps me not to fight the change anymore because I have an open mind to hear from God and take His direction. It's a process to shift how we view our troubles, but with practice, we can change our perspective, and that's a victory. Philippians 1:6 says, God who began a good work within you will keep right on helping you grow in His grace until His task within you is finally finished on that day when Jesus Christ returns. God has a plan too. He says He's just going to keep on helping us until it's time for us to go be with Him. He never plans on stopping helping you if you keep seeking Him for His help. He is here for us. He wants to help us overcome. He wants to help us change. He wants to help us become like His Son, Jesus. And so until then, we just got to be real with ourselves and know we need to expect the unexpected. Things are going to happen. There's more battles to come. And when you're in community, you have a place to face them and work on them. The final letter in our acronym for tonight is another victory we discover here in community in CR. And that is why for you are not alone. Before coming to CR, many of us were in the midst of storms, and many of us felt very alone. We felt like we were the only ones with the problem, and we can't talk about it because what if we do? What will everybody else think about us? What if they knew? But when we choose to work our recovery in community, we learn it's helpful to be around others. And there's some benefits to that as well. Again, I'm only going to name a few of them, but one of the benefits of being in community to work on ourselves is it helps to normalize our experiences. This normalization, that we're not alone, can reduce our feelings of isolation and shame associated with our issues. Another benefit of working in community on ourselves is it helps to validate our experiences. It fosters a sense of support and compassion from others instead of feeling judged. Another benefit is we get to learn from other people's experiences, mistakes, and successes. And that can motivate us to continue coming back and to make a difference in our recovery of something we might not have thought of to try that somebody else has to have victory that we now can do because we're here in community listening what other people are sharing about with their victories. And the last benefit I want to mention is it inspires us to motivate us to stick with this and to wait for the miracle to happen and to show up. Plus, when we're in community, we have a place to remind others of how God helped us to overcome and was with us every single step of the way. And there are many others that need to hear how God is with us. There are many people who do not know that. Hebrews 13:5 says, I will never leave you or forsake you. And that is why it's so important to take advantage of our share groups each week. Because in them we're reminded that we all got stuff to deal with. God is helping us. And this can help to motivate us and keep us coming back when we realize we have a safe place to talk about it. Now, I also know that attending share groups does create some of its own challenges. Sometimes listening to others' pain can be hard to hear. And if you struggle with codependency, you may feel compelled to want to fix them afterwards by giving advice, and we need to watch out for that. We need to remember God hasn't left them. And we need to make sure we aren't trying to play little g God in their lives by telling them what to do. And sometimes some will have a compulsion to fix. And sometimes that compulsion is driven by a lack of self-worth. We might love how it makes us feel when we're thinking we're helping others by telling them what we think they need to do. But here in community, we're not here to fix each other. And if the peeps in our share groups don't ask for our opinion, we shouldn't be trying to fix them or give unsolicited advice. When we get caught up in doing this, it hinders our growth. We're the one that gets more hindered by it because we are now focused on somebody else's journey and not our own. So how can we help each other? How can we help each other if someone tries to give you unsolicited advice or fix you after a share group here in the program? Because it happens. Our junk, we leak it out on each other in here. But in here, it's a safe place to talk about it and let somebody know that, well, first of all, I just want to tell you, I know that when someone does it, and it's happened to me where people have done it to me, I know they mean well. I know it doesn't come from a bad place. I know that they think they're helping me. So first thing I do is I just thank them for caring and let them know that if I'm ready to talk to them, I will reach out to them. So I let them know that. And I want you to know if you're the person feeling compelled to fix somebody, just offer your phone number. Just offer your phone number. Tell them you can relate. Tell them you've been through what they're going through. And if they ever want to talk, they can call you. Then if they want to, they will. And if they don't, they won't. And either is okay. Now, I know I'm kind of off on a tangent here digging into this share group stuff, but I want to address this because I know this can be really hard, but it's such an important and critical part of our journeys in here because it's our place to share and talk about our victories, and that's so important to help us remember what God is helping us do and accomplish in here. But I had to learn this lesson the hard way. I had to learn about how much this can hurt somebody else. When I was pretty new to CR, it was probably maybe a year into the program, and I tried to give a gal some of what I thought was the greatest advice ever after share group one night, and you know what ended up happening? The following week, she didn't come back. And no one had her number or her email, so I couldn't clean it up, and I felt horrible. And I realized I needed to come up with a different plan for when I had this compulsion to go fix somebody. So I decided when I felt like this, I needed to get up as soon as the share group was over and literally run out of the building, get in my car, and drive away as fast as I could. And you know what? I did that until I felt like I could control the compulsion and keep my opinions to myself. And it was a great codependency training for me, honestly. And I also learned if someone wants my opinion, they'll ask me. And if they didn't ask me, then I need to keep it to myself. It's none of my business. This was a huge victory for me again and was very freeing because when I discovered it was okay to let others take responsibilities for their feelings and their struggles, that was huge for me. That God was going to help them just like he's helping me, that was huge for me. That way I could just sit and be a support by listening and letting God do the rest of the work in their lives. On the flip side of this, I just want to address one last thing, and I promise we're moving on. The no-fixing guideline we read in our share group meetings can be painful for some and can feel cold and insensitive to some when you're sharing, especially if you happen to be that person that shared something deep or painful that night. You might think when nobody says anything afterwards or hugs you afterwards, that means nobody in the group cares. And I just want you to remember, if that happens, that means the group is respecting your feelings, respecting your sharing, and respecting the guidelines by saying nothing. And if you want some input, then ask for it afterwards, after the meeting is over and closed out. Ask somebody for it. It can be especially helpful to talk to somebody afterwards who may have shared about a similar experience and that they're having a recovery in it and experiencing overcoming it. You might ask them about the process they went through. You might ask them about what changes or things they're doing differently. And those are victories. Did you just realize those two questions are directing them asking about their victories? How did you overcome? What did you change? What are you doing differently? How long have you been in the program? How did God help you? What did you have to do? And so those are about talking about their victories. But if I just go up and started unloading all my victories on you and how I got there, and that's getting back to giving you all my advice. So I just want to encourage you. This is tricky. This is hard. We all stumble through share groups sometimes, and we get to help each other learn how to be healthier versions of ourselves, even in a small, intimate setting like our share groups. So I just want to encourage that. And so that's all I got for you tonight. Let's go ahead and stand up to do the Serenity Prayer. I do also want to mention that I do have some questions on your handout. If you want to use those in share group and answer those tonight, you can. If you have your own sharing you need to do, that's fine too. I just like to throw some in there to kind of get you to think about this topic if you would like to do that. And with that, let's go ahead and say the Serenity Prayer.